Welcome to the penultimate part of this grand design series for Workers and Resources Soviet Republic. We're picking up on the 2nd of August 2017, which is God knows how long since the end of the last video. And in this video, I want to go through the successes, the failures, and more importantly, some very key lessons that I've learned. Now, I'm going to be completely upfront. I did sit down and try and do a script for this video when I'm not very good at working from a script in the best of times. I could probably do a 5-10 part video series on going through all the small lessons I've learned, some of the failures and successes. But so this video is going to be more of a top-down view. And what I'm going to be doing is just going around talking about what I feel is the key issues that I think it's worth talking about. Now, before we get started, I just want to talk a little bit about a philosophy as related to the difference between when you start the game in 1960 and the game in 1900, because I feel this is important to give you some context of what I'm going to be talking about in relation to successes and failures. And when you start the game in 1960, you normally have your first starter town. This is the first town I built in this series, or populated is probably a better term. And what you do in 1960 is you normally build your first town up, especially when you're playing in realistic mode. Then you normally look for a major industry to make a pile of cash so that you can drive your expansion. That works because you've got the I wouldn't say the fastest vehicles in the game, but you've got vehicles with capacity. And more importantly, you've got options to unlock some of the technologies, which is going to be quite important now that the new early start DLC is. There have been changes to research that may have a little bit of an impact if you're not careful. Although technically, if you start in 1960, most of the timestamps, as far as I know, won't affect you. That out the way, if you start in, say, 1900, like I did with this series, the emphasis is totally different, and that is the fact that what you're really looking for is early small-scale self-sufficiency. And by small-scale self-sufficiency, I'm talking about using mods. And I'll be completely upfront, you can't really start in 1900 or a really early start without using mods. There's no point pretending otherwise, even though at the moment I can't say what's in the new early start DLC, but I can guarantee you that if you start prior to, I think the earliest start date in the DLC is 1930, if you start before 1930, you're going to need mods. And the type of mods that you're going to be using are these small factories, because what you need to do is when you start in 1900 is get self-sufficiency in the basics, and all you've got to do is produce enough to feed your town with a surplus that you can either sell. Then, of course, an early product that you can sell is alcohol, and another one is meat. If I come down here, if you can get something up and running, you can produce meat. So there's no point looking at grand designs and to say, right, I'm going to produce clothing and on a scale like this. Simply because even if you've managed to have the money to actually build something like this, one, this consumes 20 tons of crops per day. With the low capacity, slow speed vehicles, even with the trains, you're not going to get the crops in here to drive this big enough. And at the same time, you've the vehicles that are around at this time, in 1900, they're slow moving wagons. You don't even really need to build gravel roads beyond the fact that when it rains, the gravel roads slow down. So the focus is very much on self-sufficiency, and initially it's your basics: food, clothes, alcohol. Then what happens is that the next focus is on self-sufficiency in construction industries. This is what I did here. So this is the first town I populated. This is the second town I populated. Notice that they're both very close to the border as well. Your starter towns in an early start have to be very close to the border. Again, because of that low capacity. So what you're looking for is self-sufficiency in construction. And it's this self-sufficiency that drives you. Now, I know you can argue over, if you're starting in 1930, 1940, over what your approach should be. I think the way you need to think of it, if you start with maximum self-sufficiency in 1900 and no need for self-sufficiency because of trucks in 1960, and imagine a tapering cross going there. And I would suggest that the kind of 50-50 equilibrium is around 1940, 1945. The reason for that is that it's around 1940, 1945 where you start to get the better quality vehicles, both in trains and trucks. And then that allows you to shift the mentality. So that's something that you do need to be aware of. So that out the way, hopefully that will give you an idea of what this town is about. And this is going to be what you say my first success. This town came together really quickly and it developed its self-sufficient capacity here. But what's actually happened is it's evolved and expanded over time. So like I didn't build this major farm to begin with. What we had was a small farm producing, I think it was about a few hundred tons of crops to subsidize the crop import here. Then that wasn't enough, so then I built this out here. So this town here managed to produce enough food to supply this area here. And you can see I've also used the grapevines and other ploys to be able to get foods in. Another one that you can use is over here, which is sheep pens to produce meat. Although that needs food. The grapevines are a good early start because all you need is a workforce. But bear in mind that these are seasonal, so you don't get food all year round. And so this starter town evolved over time, and I think this is a key lesson for an early start, that what you build before say 1945 or even after, in fact you can keep it going all through the game. Nothing is permanent. So for an example here, I had a rail construction office here. In fact, I had a very basic vehicle production in this area. But once I brought on the proper rail construction lines and the large vehicle production, which we'll be looking at there, it was no longer necessary. So I deleted it and used it and repurposed it for other things. That truck looks a bit rough. So this is another thing that you do need to do, is you need to delete and change things. And I think that's a key lesson and a success, because this is the first series where I've started in 1900 and come right through to 2017. So that is an early lesson I found very, very useful. What I did then was I expanded out to here and built this, and then I went across to Stilton, and then we expanded this way, and we built up this area before we started to expand across the map. Now, another key lesson I learned, and this is a partial success, is that you do need to deal with waste from very early in the game. It's a mechanic that cannot be ignored. Now, I'll go into a lot more detail about the ups and downs of waste at the end of the video, because it is a subject completely in its own right. But the key lesson I got, and I did leave it a little bit too late, while building an incinerator down here seemed like a good idea, it never really worked 100%. It was too isolated, and it still does actually service the bottom area of the map here, inside of this area here, but it never really got to the full capacity. Now, I don't want this start to be all doom and gloom, so I'm going to talk about what I feel was a major success, and that is the farming. Now, why a success is the fact that I think I now, for the first time, is actually understand full-scale farming, as in the sense of large farms. Now, this doesn't produce all the crops I need, but I'll talk about that in a little while. Now, the key lesson that I've learned from farming, and this is my partial success, is that you've got two types of fertilizer. You've got ordinary fertilizer and you've got liquid fertilizer. Now, unlike other goods which are kind of supplied almost constantly, the use of fertilizer is seasonal. So you need the ordinary fertilizer, which comes from bio waste, for the winter to get your fields fertilized after all the crops have been harvested. And then you need the liquid fertilizer here, which is then spread on the fields during the growing season between March and July. Now, one thing I found when I first did this, I thought I'd compensated by actually putting in an external liquid fertilizer tank, and more importantly, I'm actually delivering it by rail to this area here. In fact, I've been a bit sneaky here in the sense that this drop-off point supplies the liquid fertilizer to both the farm as well. So you can see here, because it's connected to here, when the train comes into here, it actually delivers the fuel and the fertilizer to the farm. So I don't have to send trucks out here, although this setup isn't ideal. And at the same time, it also supplies fuel to Clotherton here. So I've kind of killed two birds with one stone. And you do really need that high capacity of fertilizer. You can see this is a bit low at the moment, simply because we've been fertilizing these fields and the harvest is only just started. But at the same time, and this is where this is only a partial success, if I come over to here, what you'll see is I've now got an external store for the ordinary fertilizer. So in fact, if I come over to this one, this is the kind of max setup here. What I've got here is I've got an external store. It's a small one because this is a bit a late addition. I've got a fertilizer tank and I've got a fuel tank here. And if I come down here, you'll see that what I've got here is the fertilizer tank and the fuel tank attached to a pump, which pumps it into here. What this means is that if I click on some of these fields, that's the wrong field. You'll see that I've got a high fertility in this field, although the fertility is dropping because the harvest is being gathered in. And this is the way that you ensure that your fertility of the farm is preserved, is don't rely on trucks to deliver, because as I say, the requirements are seasonal, and if you're running a very large farms like this, the internal storages, even on these large farms, can get depleted very, very quickly. So you do need the extra to ensure that you've got maximum fertility. I've had several comments in various videos over this, is that if you can't drive the fertility up to about 200%, your harvest will not be, you could suddenly be going several years, everything's working great. Then you get a bit of a glitch with, say, producing the fertilizer, and suddenly your fertility is down to 150%, maybe even as low as 100%. That means you lose half your crop, and that is a big major issue, which then is a good segue into the next thing I mentioned. Again, this is when your economy gets really large. You do need a contingency. And if I let the game run, you see what I've got here. Ships are the best way to bring in crops. Don't rely on trains, because all they do is go down and clog up your customs sheds, which you need for key exports. So if you've got a port, get it in there. For this, I needed 2 distribution offices. And what these distribution offices do, I think we might have a train here. Yeah, this is the one train here. We'll just follow him in. And you can see, even though the harvest has started, this train is still delivering crops. Let's see where he's delivering it to the meat side. Yeah, he's delivering it to, in fact, you can see there's another train coming out. And this is the example. And what this is going for, you can see, that is to keep enough crops in here to keep the food production going. This is a food production center here. And this is really important lesson that I've learned. You can't rely on your primary foods and alcohol and clothes on purely based on harvesting, no matter how big you are. And to give you an idea, you can see here, I've got this farm is for the meat production. I'll come back to that. You've got 1, 2, 3. This farm is for the clothing industry. 4, 5. This is the first farms I built. And you've got 5, and I've got another farm over here, 6. These do not, even with maximum fertility of 200%, don't produce enough crops now to feed a population of 153,000. And again, I think this is one thing this series has really reinforced to me. Crops underpin a vast majority of all your different industries. And because it's not just food, alcohol, clothes and meat, with the meat packing part here, it's also chemicals, because if I come down here, you'll see that to produce chemicals, you need crops. It's very easy to underestimate the crops, the importance to your overall economy, and you will never have enough, you know, no matter what you do. So anyway, don't want to stay on that too long. What I want to do is talk about here. This is my centralized meat production. This is virtually all the meat for this area is produced, and you can see it's all coming out of one slaughterhouse, which is producing say 60 tons of meat per day at maximum capacity, and it does run at very high capacity. The problem I got at the moment is shifting the meat out to a central storage, but I think this worked very, very well actually. The only mistake I kind of made was that I think I should have put a bit more attention into kind of making sure that the crops could get delivered maybe a bit bigger capacity, although this does store 8,000, although it never gets there. And so you can see here what I've got is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 actual livestock farms, which are then supplied using slightly eccentric tractors. And what these are done is brought down to this, this range. Again, at maximum capacity, this range never fills up. It's also interesting, again, slightly aside for waste, is that you get a lot of, if this fills up, you get a lot of bio waste. And I suppose that is also a good segue into talking about producing fertilizer. Now, I must admit, producing a fertilizer at scale has been a bit of a learning curve. I've tried various versions over the end, just to give you the potted thing. Originally, I put it over here, and you can just see the last vestiges of it, of the fertilizer plant here. This was a big mistake. Your fertilizer production needs to be close to where your farms are. And what I finally settled on, and it also needs a rail connection, is this here. Again, you don't need massive amounts of fertilizer plant, except for the reason which I'll explain in a little while. And what I've got here is the bio waste comes in here, and I've also got this to actually distribute the fertilizer and also sell the surplus. So you do get, once you've got your recycling up and running and you're getting the biological waste flowing into here, things go pretty quickly, and it is pretty good. But managing it is a bit of a mess. You can see I've already got lots of surplus here. So this is actually an adaptation. Originally, this was the hazardous and mixed waste pickup point for this area. But what I did is I rebuilt it up here. Again, I'll talk about waste later on. And what this is the kind of main central waste distribution area here. What I found though is that the meat production plant here was producing so much bio waste that the only easiest way to deal with it, bearing in mind that I had 3 major farms here as well, is to build a secondary fertilizer plant. So the key takeaway I've got for producing fertilizer is the fact, well, that's still going. That's a hangover from the early days where I'm actually burning the hazardous waste. Interesting. Yeah, what you need to do is bring the bio waste to your fertilizer plant. Bear in mind that you need to get chemicals as well. Chemicals, again, is a very interesting distribution logistics challenge. I'll talk a little bit more if I got time for that. So the ordinary fertilizer, you need it near the farms. What I found with the liquid fertilizer, you really need it near a source of oil, chemicals. And what I've actually got here is a synthetic fertilizer plant here, and what you need to have this near is a train distribution hub. So what I did is I tucked this up here, simply because this is directly connected to the chemical plant, because although the synthetic fertilizer factory doesn't produce that much chemicals, you do need to have it running regularly. And what you do need is to have a reasonable store to run from the actual to distribute it. And you can see the tie-in now, which is what I was saying earlier. This is a train, and the train is delivering the liquid fertilizer directly to the farms. That just makes everything a lot more efficient. Okay, that positive out the way, I just want to talk very quickly about this area here. This area is a reasonable success. It's had a few ups and downs over the years, partly there. One thing I will show you is this is a little bit of disaster recovery. This is actually producing very small amounts of electronics. The reason for that, and again I'm touching on waste management here, is that when you burn things, I'll go into more depth later on, you run through separation plants, and I was starting to get a surplus of plastic. So what I did in the end is I built a electronics and electrical components assembly yard here, and this is a slightly haphazard precursor to something I will talk about when I get down to one of my kind of mixed successes, is probably the polite way of saying it. The one mistake I made up here, if I can find Ollerton again, is that while this has worked, I've never really been able to get the full capacity out of here, although it doesn't really make any difference, because, and that is the fact that when I plan this, now when you do an early start, cableways can be a good way to move around people once you've done the necessary research. But what I really should have done here is plan 2 cableways, not just one. I think if I'd had 2 cableways out here delivering to the same area, this area would be a lot more efficient. As it is, I had to do the usual solution, which is patch it in with buses, and it kind of works. And I mean, it as I say, it's had its ups and downs with supplies, but it's done that area there. Now, another kind of success I want to talk about is Stilton. Now, Stilton is actually the main success from here is actually using the early metro, and you can see here, and it's above ground in the city, and then it goes underground, and that's the first time I've kind of used it on an end-to-end line, and I think it works. One, you can build it quicker because tunnels take a long time to build. So I think this is a key lesson I've learned, is I've always kind of been half put off building metros, and I'll show you an example of a full metro after this. I think if you want to get up and running early with a metro, is you build the sections where you're going to pick people up in elevated sections, and then if I come underground here, use the underground section where you want to get into the industry, because it means that you don't break up your industry going in this area. Now this Stilton was my first kind of get some steel produced to cut down my overall costs. It worked. The main thing that I kind of never really took into consideration properly, I thought I could get enough from the coal mines that are here. I think there's one there. There's one on each side of the border. The reason they're separated is the fact that because this is actually a map edge here, which is unique to this map, and if you're not sure, you can see the red lines here. If I hadn't had that, I'd been able to press the output of this coal mine to help, and there's another coal mine up here. So I've got 2 coal mines coming into here, and the coal supply has been pretty good here. But one thing I didn't really do is give an export area here, but it served its purpose. And again, coming back to the philosophy in early start, it was never going to be the major hub of the economy, but it served right up until this area was built, which is a kind of a major area here, where the fact I've got 2 steel mills, 2 mechanical components, and you can see this is driving this area here. This has worked except for one slight flaw. Everything's always got a flaw, is the coal supply. I should have paid more attention to the need for coal. And here's another one of my failures. Might as well show it to you while it's actually running. And that is the fact that what I've got here is, you'll see that this train is blocking this train with this junction. I should never have built this junction. But you can also see that the vulnerability with having this here, because I had to put a signal here to be able to make sure this junction works. And what it means now is long trains now interfere with this section here. And I think another key lesson I'm taking away from this is that if I find a distribution office, is the fact that I've always tended to go for short trains and of 115 meters, and I plan my my track lengths for junctions and things like this around that. Now, if I show you these distribution offices, and just to measure it, you'll see the distribution office is 155 meters. And I think in my next series, I'm going to be planning gaps of about 160 meters between junctions. It's going to make planning a little bit more complicated, but I think it's going to be very important. We will come back here. Now, as promised, what I'll do is I'll come up here and show you this town here. And this has a fully underground, except for the fact that whenever you build a metro system, you always got to have at least a short section above ground in order to be able to build it if you're in realistic mode. Technically, and also you've got to supply the trains to be able to do the auto replacement for when the metro trains run out. Although one lesson I have learned is that metro trains in themselves are quite long lasting. If I come in here, you can see I've got metro trains here of 61 years of age. And if I show you that one, and you can see they're only 62. So if you do go for metros, the replacement rate for metro trains is quite long. So you don't need to really worry too much about supplying the different options. Now, this area is the last real project that we've worked on. Well, second to last project. This has worked really well. To be honest, I got a little bit too carried away here with balancing the output, but I think I'm getting more than enough aluminium from this configuration. I wouldn't duplicate, and I'm also getting more than enough. I'll show you here, bauxite from 2-3 mines, and this worked. The aircraft production is pretty good. I do have a bit of a problem with my aircraft maintenance. I think let's just have a quick look. I must admit, I'll be completely upfront. I don't really 100%. Let me just check something. I've got a problem with. I'm not delivering this still. Is it this one? Yeah. Yeah, a bit of a fail there. Sorry about that. It's the little things in this game that sink you, especially when you've got a complex kind of economy that's really big. And I think that's also worth mentioning that once you get past about 80,000-90,000 and you're playing this game, more and more of your time will be spent actually managing problems, because there's always something going wrong. There's a truck breaking down, a junction that gets blocked or something like that. Now, another thing I'll talk about while we're here is, and it's a key lesson, because this is the first time I've ever built cities with these big blocks with kind of more than, say, 400 people. To be honest, this is probably going to be the last time I'm going to build these as well. Even these Dnipro flats, which holds 600 people, they seem to be more trouble than they're worth. I mean, if you come into here, you look at these buildings here, these have got 300 people in. They don't have any real mess problems and messages, but these always seem to have somebody who's got something to whinge about. Probably the better example is down here, where I've got the Dnipro flats. See, we've got flats with here, but I always seem to have these people who say they can't participate in sport You always get a lot of people. They can't have food. They can't find culture. It's a bit like this. It says we got six citizens here. We got 13 citizens unable to participate in sport. Right here, I've got a sports hall, and they can get there. But I've just found that these large blocks, they just seem to mess the city up, and I've got no idea really why that would actually go. Just going to zap that. Another top tip here, guys. If you want your economy to grow when it's big, is do this regular, repeatable research for vaccination. It keeps your population a little bit healthier, and more importantly, it actually promotes growth. These buildings, it looks like I've got a bit of a problem growing here. Actually, I might have to look into it. I don't. Since I've got a shortage of electronics, this is probably a good way of talking about something else that's quite fundamentalist lesson that I learned. That is that your disaster management, when you build really large cities like this, when things go wrong, and they will go wrong, and say you get a food shortage, then that could be down to a train breaking down, or your food production stops because you haven't got enough crops. The long and the short of it is that what can happen is that you've got a major town. I think the population of this town is 21,000, which is technically a small economy. I mean, I've played a whole game and the maximum population was 20,000, and that was on several towns, but this is all in one area. What happens is when you get a major crisis, and say, for example, you do run out of food, and this town has run out of food several times. What happens is that you solve the problem. The food deliveries come in, even with a rail network with longer trains coming in. You can't deliver the food fast enough because the distribution offices are pushing forward. Even if you've got the food reserves, if you've got a problem with food production, then you've got a real big problem, and this also applies to fuel. The game carries on going and consumes in your warehouses. And what happens is that you spring in food deliveries here. They come in, you fill this up, then you get a delivery of 150 tons of food, and that disappears almost immediately because you've got to feed your populations. So what happens is you can end up in a constant cycle of starvation because you can't get ahead of the curve. And the key lesson that I've learned, if I come down to here, is that I think may not be most example, because I think I've been using it, is what you need is a distribution. It says here emergency transport. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if I'm not using an emergency transport train at the moment. And what I've got in here is a selection of different types of wagons. The only ones that I've never really found a reason for emergency transport is aggregate. But I've got waste trucks in here, fuel for when we get a fuel shortage, a couple of meat trucks, and some open holes to deal with moving some of the other products. And also, I'm pretty certain the trains are out. And I normally keep 2 trains in here. Oh no, probably one of them's over here because I'll be moving rolling stock. And what I do is these trains, I set up manual routes, either to, if I got a good store of what we call it here, if I got a good supply of food here, I will send it there. If not, I will send it to the border. This is why you need contingency money. And what you do is you use these trains, because they're not subject to the vagaries of the rail distribution offices loads. You can use these to force in large amounts of food into an area where we've got problems, or anything really. It's also useful for when things go wrong with waste management, but I'll talk about that later on. So I think while we're here, I might as well kind of move forward because I don't want this video to be too long. As I said in the intro, I could write a book on all the things that I've learned and didn't learn. This over here is both my biggest disaster and one of my biggest successes. by that I mean that if I kind of pretend that everything off the right of the screen doesn't exist, this area is the success. It's got all my construction materials in here. You can see got the helicopter pickup points. I've got a concrete plant, an asphalt plant, and this is, you can see it's not exactly near in the center of the map. The center of the map is there and the mountains, but it's close to the center of the map. This is where my helicopter construction offices are working. It's fed by trains. The grain silo was my first attempt at crop contingency, but it was too complicated, and therefore that's why it's been kind of partially abandoned. But this works really well. What I've got coming into here, I've got bricks, prefabs, even boards in here, and also aluminium and steel in here. You've got steel here. Actually, this is the aluminium here. So what's happening is all my helicopter construction crews work off of this area here. That means I can guarantee that they've always got resources to pick up. I've got 3 warehouses here. One's for mechanical components, one for electrical components, one for fabric. That's for the other stuff which they need for construction. The fabric warehouse is here. And this works very well. And what I've got up here is, you can see I've got 1, 2, 3. Well, I've got 6 rail distribution offices here, which actually supply this area, picking up materials, distributing materials, because this center also operates as a distribution center to ensure that my sub-distribution centers, and by that I mean, again, this is bearing in mind that if you've got maintenance enabled and vehicle repairs, you've got to send relatively small amounts of stuff to different parts of the map. So what that does is it's supplying things like this. So this is the central warehouse is receiving steel, boards, bricks and prefabs here, which is now the pickup point for the maintenance in this area. The only thing that isn't supplied here is concrete, but the maintenance offices here are actually buying their own concrete. You can see that these construction offices is now. One top tip I will give you is that when you are doing maintenance, building maintenance, always have 2 overlapping construction offices. In fact, probably a better example is here. I've got a large construction office here, and then I've got a small one here, because construction offices can't repair themselves. So be aware that you can't put a single construction office inside of a building. You need 2. And then what you do, and the other thing I would say is, again, it's a little bit of a tip, is a mistake I made is burn buildings. Once you get moved away from your area and you're no longer using these for general construction, leave these on buildings, conveyors, electrical wiring. The reason for that is that if you get an earthquake and you lose a building, these will repair once your site has been cleared. And at that vein, what I would suggest is that you don't have to build conscious demolition offices. You can use the free ones. But what you do want is demolition offices covering all your map. It means that if you get a fire or an earthquake or something like that and the building collapses, these demolition crews will go out. You can see I've got a little free one here covering Ollerton. So you can use up all the free demolition offices. If we come to waste management here, if I can find the demolition, I can never find. Oh, is it under? No, it's under construction, is it? It's a kind of bit of an odd place here. Yeah, but if I click on the demolition offices here, you can see you can have up to 7. I'm using 3 at the moment, but give you a demolition. What that means is when something happens, you can clear the site, and once the site's cleared, if you've got these construction offices set like this, they will actually go out and rebuild the building without thinking about it, because if you've got need to keep them supplied to maintain your buildings, If I could just again, this as an example. Now, don't be lulled into the false sense of security that I went into by thinking that you don't need certain resources. Your construction officers need access to the same resources as you would get for normal construction, because all the different types of buildings like electrical connections and things like that need all those resources. So that's a little bit aside. Let's just get back to what I was talking about. So the material supplied was a success. The centralized food and alcohol thing was a partial success. I think it works for meat distribution, but I think in the past I've always gone for a decentralized distribution system. And by decentralized system, I mean is that you every area's got its own kind of local food stocks, which can keep everything going. This is not particularly that good. It's partially worked in the sense that it works as an export area. So I would probably build a centralized area to gather up the resources which I would that I might want to produce in excess, and then actually export those resources. But I wouldn't use it as a centralized distribution system for key resources. I think a decentralized system is going. Now I'm going to talk about my probably biggest disaster, which was building this to support this. If I let it run, you'll see it works at the moment when everything is going well. You can see here we got the trains coming in here, dropping off, putting out. Everything works really great. But, and it's a great big but, the moment the system comes under pressure, it becomes very, very vulnerable. Partly because of the fact that I haven't really allowed the track distances to get the trains going here. You can see once you get a long train in here, and the trouble is that eventually when there's a crisis and you've got lots and lots of trains coming in here, I think the other mistake I made is that I integrated this with the main line. This might work a little bit better if it wasn't part of the main line. The other problem is that I've got a coal pickup point here, which I put in, which is kind of, how can you put it? Puts a lot of demand here. You can see now, see where things are starting to get a little bit icky, and all you need is one of these long trains to get caught so that it slightly overlaps the signal here. And again, another tip, guys, is whenever you've got a train coming into a segment like this, always ensure that the entry segment is longer than the longest train you actually run. You can have a short sector after that, because the train will run into it and block that and stop the train moving into it. But if you've got a sector like that, and it's short, and then say that a long train comes in and overhangs this junction, then it blocks the whole lot up. But you can see here, these are just too complicated, and it's just too vulnerable. And I'll go as far as saying that when I run my free run test, you can see an example here as well. This train is kind of going there. This is what's going to destroy my economy, especially is the fact I've built this round a centralized system. This is by far my biggest disaster. Now, I want to talk about one before we move on to waste. I just want to talk about what's my biggest learning curve, actually. I've built nuclear reactors in the past, but I've never really been able to get them running really efficiently. Or this is the first time I've actually done it. And I think the key, if you're going to run a nuclear reactor, is that if you've got the opportunity, is to build it in the center of the map. The reason for that is that if I turn on the power lines, thank you, game. If I turn on the power overlay and show it to you, what you'll see is I've got now the twin reactor has 9 high tension connectors, and the way you can get the best out of this actually is to be in a place in the center of the map where you can run all 9 connectors out. You can see them going, and each one of these goes to a separate area of the map. Now it's a little bit of all your eggs in one basket type setup, but this is the way to really run and get the best benefit out of a nuclear reactor. Obviously having access to uranium is really good. Also make sure you manage the waste system here, and of course and guarantee a constant workforce here. And you can see this is now running at 60-70%. And the way I've distributed the power is they run to certain areas as a primary source, and you need to be aware of what the loading would be. I did make a mistake here in the fact that I thought I could run this town, and all this vehicle production here from one 18 megawatt line. As you can see here, I had to put a second 18 megawatt line in, and the other thing I also had to do was put in these high voltage priority switches. These switches allow you to direct the current. So what I've got here is that this area here has got its own 18 megawatt supply. The original supply is still connected to the other sector, but it's now one way, which means that the vehicle manufacturing area can't draw the power from the city, but the city in return, should it need it, you can see it's drawing power from the vehicle production area, because if this shuts down, it's not the end of the world. But if this shuts down and loses power, they go there. And I feel that is probably the best lesson I've learned, actually, of what you'd call the correct way to actually use a twin nuclear power station. If you can't get a setup like this, it's not really worth building it. You might as well build a single nuclear reactor or use alternative power supplies. But if you can get it in the center of the map, so you can distribute power all across the map, and of course you've got to protect it like a crown jewels, because if this actually shuts down, most of your economy is toast. But as I say, you can use those interconnectors to support. So another example is here, because the bottom part of the map here has its own power supplies left over from the early start, but they do get occasional periods of high load. So again, what I've done is I've put a connector in here so that this area can draw power from this area here. This is the reason why if I ran the monitor long enough into night, you will see that the power cable, this cable here coming from the nuclear reactor, will start to get fairly high load, not because it can't cope with this, but by the fact that this area starts to draw power in. But the directional connector prevents this area pulling the power from here, because this area here is totally dependent on this coal-fired power station down here. So this is not coal processing, this one here. And if I show you here, this one's, especially at night and winter, this one really pushes out to near enough its max. So a key lesson, and I'd say a key success, is that I've actually managed to finally get my head around the twin nuclear reactor and the power distribution systems. And I think that really does work successfully. Now I'm already going on too long, so now I'm going to talk about what I promised about. And this is a subject which has been a real roller coaster. And while on the surface, waste management looks like the simplest of mechanics to use, it's probably one of the most complex mechanics in the game. And you need to remember that a good waste management system underpins everything, because the moment any of your industries fill up, they shut down. So a key example is this nuclear power plant. If for some reason you don't take the waste away, ignore the nuclear waste, but the moment this fills up, this shuts down. It also means, if you don't clear the waste from your towns, what will happen is people will get sick very quickly, and that will cause a problem with the population. Now, one of the biggest decisions that you're going to need to make is where to do your separation. because it's very important to running the efficiency. Because and I'd like to say a special shout out to Vimes and a couple of the internal 3 division testers, because I've had some quite long discussions about waste management, trying to solve my own problems. Because one of the problems with waste management is that when you're unloading here, you can see that these trains will unload pretty quickly. They come in, they unload. But send one of these to a customs shed and forget it. So while exporting your waste to the customs shed may sound attractive, it's okay as long as you've got a customs office, say down here. It's down right in this corner, and which is really quiet. No one's coming in here. In fact, look, just to show you, this guy's very obligingly. If you watch, this guy is actually unloading. You see how slow that unload speed is. In fact, I think, yeah, this guy's just export, and this guy is exporting fertilizer. So if you imagine a train, one of these big waste trains, coming in here. Oh, they've all disappeared now. Coming in here to unload here. There we are. There's one here. And he's got 420 tons or 120 tons of waste to unload at the border. Forget it. The next thing to do with unloading is the construction waste and your aggregate waste. And by aggregate waste, I'm talking about construction waste, metallic scrap, and aluminium scrap. In fact, probably the way to kind of try and explain it is if I can find a waste dump. It's got waste dumps everywhere. If I can find a waste pickup point here. Now, what you've got is different types of waste. You've got construction waste, mixed waste, construction waste, metal scrap, plastic waste, biological waste, and hazardous waste. Now, it's worth noting, now biological waste can only be separated at source in here. This is where the decision for your separation comes from. Now, what I've found is that in domestic areas, unless you've got a waste which produces a large amount and you've got something somewhere to do with it, so what you need to do is come in here and look at what you've got waste. Now, I'm not collecting biological waste here because I've got more than enough coming from other parts of the map. But when it comes to industry, say, for example, mines. So if we go down to here, what you will find is a mine, these mines here, will produce large amounts of construction waste here. And this is the reason why this has got a direct connection to a transfer office. Now, it pays to separate construction waste from the mixed waste at source. The reason for that is that, and now I'm going to go back to Wastebury and talk about, there is, I don't know if it's a flaw in the game or not, but if you use normal waste management trucks, these are these ones here, which can carry all sorts of waste. If you send one of those to an aggregate unloading, or even to unload aggregates, the unload speed is very slow. So you can bring small amounts in here and offload. But if you're moving large amounts of aggregate waste, like I said, construction waste primarily, metallic scrap, what you've got to do, so apologies for going backwards and forwards across the map, what you've got to do is use this kind of setup, is go completely over to using an aggregate based solution. So for example, I've got waste trucks picking up from the transfer office the construction waste here. It's bringing it down, dropping it off here and putting it into here. And the metallic waste is coming into here because we've got some metallic waste in the steel mill, and then we've got the general waste that's coming from this area here. Now, this, when you use aggregate stores to move waste, you can't use normal waste trucks. You've got to use your normal aggregate hoppers. Where am I? Oh, I'm in the wrong place. Sorry. Got to find waste B. So what you're doing effectively is transferring your construction waste and metallic waste to a normal hopper-based transfer system. That's by far the easiest way to move construction waste. If you're only getting a small amount of construction waste, it's far better just to move it using this. And if I come in here, click on here, and we look at this, you'll see what's coming in here is a hodgepodge of mixtures of stuff, because this area here is pulling in most of the waste from the across the map, and it's all being processed here through the things. Now what I've got is 2 separation plants here, which are running into 2 large incinerators. And one tip I will give, if anyone's not sure about waste management, always separate before you incinerate. I've seen even experienced players separating after incineration, because what you need to come out of here is pure ash. It says mixed waste, but it's pure ash, because ash is a fairly big problem with getting rid of it. And you can see what I've got here is 22 large open claws now, which are used, because what happens is when this runs, if I let this run, you'll see that ash slowly decomposes over time, but it can get polluted with biological waste. That having said that, in the similar way, or in the kind of reverse way with respect to the contingency for crop, you want, when you've got a major waste processing system like this, put in a contingency for to get rid of that mixed waste, that ash, should you need it. And the best solution I've found, because of course if you send it to the border, you have exactly the same problem as you will have with if you try and sell waste. What I done is I've set up this down here, and you can see actually this guy is very obligingly just doing it. What he's doing is floating the waste in here. You can see it's full, and around here somewhere is a is I'm selling off 1,800 tons. So selling it by ship is probably the thing. So selling the mixed waste of the ash, I've got to say it correctly, is the preferred option. I think what's happening here is this is being filled up. I think what I need to do is, if you just come here, actually what I'll do is I'll just turn that one off, because I've got the decomposition here, so I don't really need to export the waste at the moment. And this is what I've been doing from time to time, is when it's under control, I turn this dump off, and then that means I don't spend money wasting. Not that it makes any difference in the moment. So that is one of the key problems with mixed waste, is managing the ash. Another area where you've got to be a bit careful is hazardous waste, because you need to get it. Hazardous waste can come in surges, which can overload your system. So again, sometimes you need a contingency. One thing you do need to remember is, if you put hazardous waste into any store, the entire contents of that store becomes hazardous waste. So for example, if a train with even 1 ton of hazardous waste comes into here, it will turn all 77 tons of this into hazardous waste. The other thing I would say is that when you set up something like this, you need to put provision to deal with all the other stuff that comes out the separation plant. And that is in the sense of plastic waste, construct waste, metallic waste, and aluminium. Although aluminium scrap can be virtually ignored. You can just sell it across the border with a truck if you need it, or just store it somewhere in a train and export it by train. So when you've got this, you do need the capacity, and of course what you've got to do then is think of something to do with it. And quite often you can turn it into things. The logistics can be fun from the point of view of how you get it back into your normal production systems. And I think I've covered most of waste. As I say, waste is by far the biggest headache Another thing I would say, a key lesson I've learned is when you're managing waste, use specialist waste distribution offices. Don't mix it with other offices because the waste trains can come here. What I would also suggest is I had a problem up here, and it's this. Where is it? So I built a transfer office here, and now the thing you got to remember is that the way the game decides on when to pick up waste is that when something is 80% full. The problem with using this transfer office, it seems, this is as far as I can work out, is that these will not be emptied until the game thinks that I've got 80% hazardous waste in here, and this is predominantly a problem with trains. So what will happen is that lots of waste will build up here, and then suddenly the train will come in. So what I've got here is some residual stuff. Trucks are a little bit more forgiving, and they will come and move waste. So what this is, despite the fact it's got other stuff in it, it's now only for mixed waste. You can see I've specialized out the aggregate waste, and the hazardous waste here is actually being shipped over to here, and you've got hazardous waste being picked up here. Again, if you look at this train here, no, that's the mixed train. There's the hazardous waste there. The other thing I would say is, which is a bit of an exception, if you're running an industry that produces large quantities of hazardous waste, it's worth investing in processing the hazardous waste on site and turning it into mixed waste, because it just makes the life a little bit easier when it comes to things. It's also it also applies to if you've got a really large clothing industry going. The fabric factory can produce quite a lot of big hazardous waste, and so it pays to get it within an area where you can at least send the hazardous waste by train. Another industry that produces, I wouldn't say an excess amount of hazardous waste, is your chemical industries. They produce quite a lot of hazardous waste. I don't think the oil refinery. So never underestimate your hazardous waste. Now, I could keep on going and going about waste management. There's so many little wrinkles, like for example, when you're making fertilizer, because of course technically it's a waste product, if you contaminate although I think the devs are working on this one, when you get small amounts of biological waste come in here, it will decompose into fertilizer. And what can happen is that if this percentage gets too big, this will then switch to this dump will switch to fertilizer, and then that will cripple your distribution system. So again, it comes back down to deciding on where you're going to do the separation, where it's worth it. What my general rule as a final tip is, if you're getting 20% from your waste here, so I'm not sure this is empty, so it's not going to show it to you. You come into here, if you're getting more than 20% of something out, it's probably worth separating it, as long as you can move it to somewhere where it can be processed. But metal scrap and construction waste, if you move them with aggregate trucks, you can sell them at the border. If you're getting relatively small quantities, you can just sell them using ordinary trucks. They're a little bit more obliging. And I think I've gone way over time on this video. Apologies for that. Hopefully you found this interesting about the successes. Overall, I'm happy with this economy. It's got lots and lots of problems which will need constant management. And the final video in this series is I'm just going to let the game run and see how quickly everything falls apart without supervision. And I'm prepared to bet that the major trigger is going to be here. This is what's going to take out the economy. And of course, once that starts to happen, things will fall apart very, very quickly. But this is where I'm going to leave it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Any questions, opinions, comments, tips, feel free to chuck it in the video description. So until next time, whatever you do, enjoy your gaming.